Greetings, everyone. It's Kalei Ross with In Pursuit of Purity and KaleiRoss.com. I love learning about chocolate and all facets of the chocolate making industry because chocolate cultivates connections. So join me on this journey. I'd love to have you come along with me. I hope you enjoy these videos.
Well, greetings, everyone. This is Kalei Ross with In Pursuit of Purity and KaleiRoss.com. And this morning, I am actually doing a virtual tour, if you will. I'm going over to the other side of the river to Portland, Oregon. And we have Nick from Soul Lift Cacao with us this morning. Thank you so much for being with us, Nick.
Hey, Chloe, thanks for having me.
Well, I know just as everybody in this world has a chocolate story, we'd love to hear your story about how you got into the cacao world.
It's a long story, but I've been getting this question a lot lately. I always loved chocolate. Grew up just experiencing chocolate through candy, basically. And when I was in my late 20s, I was diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome, and there was never any really clear explanation for what was going on, but it was happening kind of in waves or phases for it ended up being 5 years before somebody shared some of what I would now consider authentic ceremonial cacao from Guatemala with me in 2015. And it had a really profound impact on me. It was like I describe it like a light switch turned on at that point. And it wasn't like I was cured instantly or something. It was more of a watershed moment where I started to pretty quickly make some really profound changes with my holistic health. And so it ended up being an important piece of the puzzle that within a year and a half after that, then I was able to get to a point of pretty much total recovery from chronic fatigue.
It's
So
wonderful.
that's the beginning of the story.
I don't want to steal your thunder because it is a great story. And I would love to hear how Guatemala kind of got wrapped up into that story.
Yeah, so the interesting coincidence is that my sister is adopted from, or was adopted from Guatemala. So I first went there in 1996 when I was only in eighth grade and had just started taking Spanish class recently before that, and was just kind of fascinated. It was a different time. That was right when the Civil War was ending in Guatemala. So it was still a little bit scary going there, seeing machine guns and things on the side of the highway, but also not really being able to understand it as a young foreigner, basically. But as an adult, then once somebody shared cacao, that type of cacao with me in the U.S. in Michigan, where I'm from originally, then I felt even more inspired to go back and to learn about cacao and to also visit. I had been hearing about eco villages and different sustainability projects and things happening in Central America. So in early 2016, I spent 4.5 months backpacking through Guatemala, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, especially those three. And most of that time ended up being in Guatemala. And I just really connected with some of the communities there. And in particular, one family that had their own farm. So yeah, in 2016, I just carried some back, I think like at least 30 pounds in a suitcase, basically.
Wow.
And wasn't even thinking about selling it, just knew that it was helping me and I wanted to share it with friends at home. And so that year I began, because I had already been hosting different kinds of holistic workshops and transformational experiences for a few years before cacao came in. So the picture, I just sort of, I weaved it in very quickly and was hosting cacao circles for friends, a weekly cacao circle in 2016, and it became a very nice gathering for the community there. Each week people coming together and just having a meditation and drinking cacao or eating a cacao. I think I was making little bliss balls at that time because I that was how I learned how to prepare and share cacao before even learning how to make a drink, actually. So yeah, that was even way before it became a business, but that's the next part of the story.
You've actually traveled to well, you were in Michigan and then you moved to California and then to Portland, Oregon. Tell us a little bit about that journey, like what led to going to those different states.
Yeah, it was partly through traveling through Central America, and a lot of people who were going there at that time had their home base on the West Coast in California, or a lot of people from Colorado too. But uh, there were people who were kind of whispering the interesting things about the West Coast to me when I was traveling through Central America. So once I started to feel better, once the chronic fatigue started to come into more of a recovery state by like 2017, then I was kind of nomadic even before that. That's been part of my story, definitely. But I just had an intuition that uh, to go to California, basically. So I went to San Diego at the start of 2018, and at that same time, I felt like it was time to register Soul Lift Cacao as an actual food business. Whereas I came up with that name, Soul Lift Cacao, in 2016, but just as a name for the events that I was hosting. And but it became a brand, though. Yeah, that's interesting to think about. 2 years before it was an actual business. So in 2018, though, that's when I created the website and made the actual e-commerce business, so people could order it on the website and I could send cacao in the mail. And at that time, I was I had switched the source and was just working still with a single group, a single collective in Guatemala.
You know, you mentioned the name. What inspired the name Soul Lift Cacao?
It's how it felt to me, because it's as a food business now, I have to be kind of cautious about how I describe the benefits of cacao, but suffice it to say that there's always, I think, been for at least 3,000 or more years, there's evidence that cacao has been thought of as a sacred plant ally, or something that's not just a food, but has something, connects with spiritual practices in different cultures of what's now called Latin America, right? But it's not just a superfood. So it's not. There are biochemical explanations for some of the sensations and benefits of cacao, but there's also something a little bit more mysterious to it that just it's part feeling, but it's also part just looking back a year after I first had that authentic cacao, and then realizing in retrospect the expansion that happened in my life. So that's the kind of thing that the word soul points to me.
Sure. Yeah. I want to just read word for word a description that your website says in regards to the Guatemalan cacao, having and as it says, having a richness of flavor and depth of sensation that was unique in the world. Describe that in more detail for us. What does that look like or
it's
experience?
Complicated. Yeah, it's possibly controversial. I'll say that to start. With the way that the idea of ceremonial cacao was introduced to me, it seemed very connected with Mayan culture in particular. And like I said, I traveled to other countries and tasted some cacao firsthand. And then I also, once I was back in the US, just tried to see if I could find cacao sourced from other countries. A lot of craft chocolate, fancy chocolate, as you might know, in the US, it seems to be coming from South America, Peru and Ecuador, and some of it's very good, like very, very nice taste. But comparing all of those, there seemed to be a deeper sensation, especially if having like a large drink and combining it with some kind of meditative or introspective practice. It felt, the Guatemalan cacao kept feeling different to me. And I kept hearing other people describe it that way too, people who had traveled around. So I didn't really have an objective basis for that for a long time, because I found that it's very difficult to find data on some of the I used the term biochemical before, but like the theobromine and caffeine content. And so now I have started to I found a lab that could test cacao samples for those too. And I've also done testing for heavy metals and other things to try to, create that type of safety. But it's been very interesting, even just testing the Guatemalan ones, how much variance there can be in a serving for the caffeine and theobromine content. So I suspect
Mm-hmm.
that's part of it, definitely.
Sure. Wow. So I guess that's something that people actually have to try to be able to really get a good sense of this description that you've given. So uh, there's a plug for you there, right? Directing people over to Soul Lift Cacao. Speaking of which, you have different flavors for your cacao. I know the snickerdoodle and the cherry have been my favorite ones so far. But tell us about what inspired some of the flavor combinations that you created.
Yeah, I would say, well, the first 2 years of the business, I just focused on 100% pure cacao. And that is
Hmm.
still most of what I do. Most of the sales are the 100% pure origins that I carry. But in late 2019, I think, was when I first made a package of what I call drinking chocolate, which to me just means that there's something mixed with the cacao. And
Hmm.
so far it's been coconut sugar. I really like that unrefined. It's kind of a gentle flavor, and it doesn't overpower the cacao to me. They go really well
Hmm.
together. And so the first one was just cacao and coconut sugar. I don't actually sell that one anymore. Uh, these days, I'm focused for the drinking chocolates. I'm focused on ones that do have either spices or extracts. So the cherry one is evaporated tart cherry juice powder rather than being like a flavoring or something.
Hmm.
I try to keep it whole ingredients. And yeah, so there's a chai one, which would be like masala chai. Snickerdoodle is cinnamon vanilla, which is similar to horchata from Latin America, that kind of flavor.
Hmm.
And I'm probably forgetting one or two others. Oh, there's a mint. The most recent one is mint drinking chocolate.
Hmm.
Yeah, so part of the motivation was to create something that might be a little bit more accessible, because for people, even people who are interested in chocolate, the idea of drinking a cup of 100% pure cacao, even if it does have some sweetener, or even if it's just called cacao or ceremonial cacao, it can be kind of confusing to people. So there's a lot of education to do, but also I try to make it more accessible to people too.
Yeah. Well, they definitely were a hit in the household. A lot of different, we've had different people coming through tasting this stuff, and so they've been enjoying it. I would like to give you the opportunity to share with the viewers what is it that you would like people to take away from our time together?
Uh, well, the story of chocolate is so much more complicated than most people realize. Even people who work with chocolate, there's the situation with most chocolate, as you may know, being sourced largely from West Africa, and I've heard some about it from Brazil. To most, as far as I understand, most products with the name chocolate are being produced in a very unethical way.
Hmm.
Yeah, with child labor or slavery type conditions, and it's very tough to know as customers or consumers. I think it's difficult to know how we can even make a difference, and obviously just looking the other way isn't going to change it. But becoming more aware of the situation and being more careful about what brands we buy from, that can make a difference. I think in any industry. So I view the chocolate and cacao world as kind of a spectrum of ethics. There are those really really terrible cases, and then the fair trade, organic movements have been a step in the right direction. But then to me, there's something that goes beyond that of uh, direct trade, where the group involved at the source is named, or there's more information provided about them, so that there can be that transparency and accountability in the supply chain, and there can be
Right.
more verification that the communities are actually benefiting. Because unfortunately, at least my understanding of the situation with fair trade in Guatemala is that families don't actually end up with that much more in their pockets compared to conventional cacao sales or pricing. And also the organic certification can be cost prohibitive for small
Hmm.
farmers in Guatemala, at least. So I just personally verify that all of the cacao is being grown without chemical pesticides or fertilizers. I have a long questionnaire, and I also try to go to the farms too to make sure that there's no evidence of child labor, things like that. Just people in the collectives being paid minimum wage at least, and so some of the groups actually provide lunch for the women to, which in a country like Guatemala and probably a lot of other cacao growing countries, even access to regular healthy food and clean water could be an issue.
Hmm. Yeah. Before we go, you have to do a plug on your cacao trips. Tell
Yeah,
us more about that.
the trips, that's one of the things I'm feeling the most passionate about these days. There have been 3 so far, and this upcoming winter I'm hoping to do 3 for, they've been 2 per winter kind of so far. And uh they've been Western Guatemala, so taking people basically around Lake Atitlan, and there are some cacao farms that grow fairly, or that are located fairly close to there. But the idea is to experience the whole tree to cup life cycle of cacao, to visit the farms, to visit collectives who do the toasting and peeling, all the hand making of the cacao, and then to also participate in some Mayan ceremonies. At least in Guatemala, it's the Mayan world. So to
Mhm.
have that really in-depth, firsthand experience of the whole big picture around cacao, so that we can better understand what it goes through before it's in a cup in the United States.
Sure. Well, wonderful. This has been very educational, and I know I would like to refer people over to your website because there's a lot of information that Nick has on his website. And as he has talked about, um, having had access to getting cacao tested, just so because I know a lot of people are concerned about the heavy metal issues and just kind of what is in it. I know that a lot of people are beginning to ask those kinds of questions. So direct them to your website. Why don't you give them your website, Nick?
Yeah, it's soulliftcacao.com, and on social media, it's at Soul Lift Cacao in most cases.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time, Nick. This has been great.
Yeah, thanks for having me.